Right now, I think I got that boy. Let's get back to the NBA, where Patrick Beverley has been given a one-game suspension without pay for shoving Chris Paul in the fourth quarter of Game 6 last week. Beverley tweeted an apology to CP3, saying emotions got the best of him. His suspension will take place in the Clippers' first game next season. Slick Rick is back with us, but Acho, is a one-game suspension enough for Patrick Beverley?
No, not at all. One-game suspension, you're really just enabling the athletes and people like Pat Bev to do it again. Here's why it's not enough, and here's my biggest issue with all this. In society, in sports, we punish people based on the outcome, not necessarily based on the crime. I hate that. Don't make no sense. Pat Bev pushes CP3 in the back. If CP3 fractures his wrist, if CP3 even flops like he typically does, Pat Bev is suspended for at least 5 games. But because CP3 did not flop, because the game was already in control, because CP3 did not get hurt by the grace of God, it's like, you know what? 1-game suspension. But the punishment clearly does not fit the crime. If we're trying to protect our athletes in sports, 3 fans were suspended forever, indefinitely, for throwing popcorn on Russell Westbrook, for throwing an empty water bottle at Kyrie Irving, and for attempting to spit at Trae Young. We're trying to protect our players. Don't you think we should protect our players from themselves? Because pushing someone in the back is far more dangerous than an empty water bottle, popcorn, and spit, although much more offensive.
Whoa.
So with that being said, yeah, it's not nearly enough of a punishment.
Yeah, I'm going to go the other way and say I'm okay with a 1-game suspension here. And I hear what you're saying, Acho, in terms of trying to prevent actions like this happening. But it's really interesting how this type of action happens a lot around Chris Paul. I can't take out of the equation who it happened to. And particularly, if we show the video again, there's a couple things here that tells me that Chris Paul was an active participant in this event. First of all, Pat Beverley is headed the other way. He's headed back to the Clippers bench. And then he hears something that Chris Paul says, and he says, oh, wait a minute. It's bad enough that I'm losing to you and you just knocked down a 3. I'm not taking insult along with injury. Also, let's show it one more time, because you're also going to see Mark Davis, the referee, coming into the picture well before the push happens. He knows he heard something that instigated this. So when I take that into account, I'm going to say, yeah, I don't want to see these type of things happen. Was it poor sportsmanship on Pat Beverley's part? No doubt about it. But when I look at the width and breadth of this series and what was going on between Pat Beverley and Chris Paul, and Chris Paul's ability to be an irritant, and my firsthand knowledge of how when he wins, he likes to rub it in, he likes to stick it in your face, he likes to let you know just how badly he's beating you. That's not always great sportsmanship either. So 1 game, I'm good with it.
I'm not good with it, and I'm a Clippers fan, as you guys know, because it's a bad precedent to set. Think about it. A punch and a push can be as similarly violent. Somebody always pushes you and you're like, that ain't the same as a punch. But did you see how Chris Paul fell now? Do you see who Chris Paul could have fell into? You think that couldn't happen with a push? It did. You think that couldn't happen with a punch? It could have. And the point is, that's violent. And if you're going to do something violent, then guess what? You got to have more than a 1-game suspension. Let's talk about precedents. I'm going to give you guys a few examples of 1-game suspensions and tell me, does it measure on the same level as this push in terms of violence? Marcus Smart, when he was suspended 1 game for threatening language at a ref. He basically cursed at a ref and got a 1-game suspension. Is that violent? I don't know. Marquise Morris, he left the bench area during an altercation. Is that the same as pushing somebody dead on the ground like that? C.J. McCollum suspended for leaving the bench as well. Rajon Rondo, foul language towards a ref. P.J. Tucker missed a flight one time and got a 1-game suspension. What the hell? And then this dude gonna push somebody, literally give him whiplash, don't know what collateral damage could occur, and we're fine with this. I'm not fine with it. The only reason why I kind of understand why they didn't give him a more severe punishment is this. We've all been in high school. We all been there on that last day of school, and somebody got some tension they got to finally resolve. And they at the flagpole about to throw hands, whatever. And then on the last day of school, when they throw hands and the principal comes and say, I'm going to suspend you. It's a lighter suspension, in part because you're going to get the break already of the offseason or in high school, the summer vacation. So you probably don't want to go too extensive with it. That's the only thing that's giving the NBA a little bit of cover and saving grace. But outside of that, just looking at the interaction, looking at the altercation, the level of violence in this, if these guys got suspended for one game, he deserved much, much more.
And Sal, you led me to this point, which I hadn't thought of, but boy, does it sting. It's an indictment on the worth of Chris Paul, at least in the NBA's eyes. Why? Because we punish people based upon who we commit the crime against. If Marcellus Wiley were to come up here and lie to me, there would be very little repercussions because of who he lied to. If Marcellus were to go home and lie to his wife, Anna Marie, there would be a little bit more of a repercussion because of the person he lied to. If Marcellus were to go in court and now lie, now he's facing jail time. Commit the same exact crime, lie to Emmanuel, lie to his wife, lie in front of a jury, but it's who did he commit the crime against. The fact that Pat Bev is only getting a one-game suspension actually tells me how little the NBA in that instance felt about the worth of Chris Paul. To Sal's point, imagine if Pat Bev would have shoved a ref in the back. Woo! Is it just one game? Same crime. But who did he commit the crime against? Not nearly a big enough punishment, and also an indictment of how the NBA feels about its players, this specific player, Chris Paul.
Okay, we're going way far afield here, but the reality is the referees are the police in this comparison, yes?
True.
And if you do something against the police versus an average citizen, are you going to pay a higher price? Hell yeah, you're going to pay a higher price. So that only makes sense. Marcellus, you're pointing out the fact that there has been inconsistency in the adjudication of the NBA when it applies suspensions.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. But there are examples going the other direction. Jason Terry punched Michael Finley in the 2006 playoffs. He missed, that was in Game 5. He was suspended one game for Game 6. That was a punch thrown. And while you guys are making this a violent act, pushing Chris Paul in the back and suggesting, well, Chris Paul didn't flop in this instance, I'm not so sure, okay? Chris Paul knows he's walking away. He knows he just said something to Pat Bev. You can't tell me that he's not waiting for something to happen and saying, oh, you know what? Let me play this up because I got him to do exactly what I wanted him to do. You can't convince me that that may not have been part of the equation. But we also had Kelly Olynyk, who shouldered Kevin Love, fouled him in the playoffs. They were eliminated. One-game suspension the following season. Andrew Bynum got 5 games, but he went head-hunting on J.J. Barea, and in that case, that was a truly violent, unnecessary act. And so when it comes to the NBA, looking at Chris Paul, I mean, Otto, you're kind of painting Chris Paul as a victim. I got to stop short there, brother, because all that Chris Paul has done over the years, whether it's flopping or instigating, look, your track record, what you do precedes you. Didn't you just give me that in the previous segment about being a thief and, like, that's going to cause you to be more culpable in a subsequent situation? Like, doesn't that same logic apply here?
In this instance, you're telling me that Chris Paul was actually the assailant, not the victim, although he was harmlessly walking back to his bench, not even looking at
Stop
Pat
it with the harmless. No. I'm not giving you harmless. I'm not giving he peaceably hit a 3 and started heading back to the bench.
Slick.
That did not happen.
Chris Paul was not in a fighting position. Like, Chris Paul, there's a difference between, you know this, Slick, go back to your college days. If you're in a club, 2 people can talk, and 2 people can talk and yell and cuss. Then somebody can escalate it by trying to fight. Then somebody can escalate it by grabbing a beer bottle. Chris Paul was cool having a little verbal sparring, but let's keep verbal sparring verbal. Once verbal sparring goes physical, now Pat Bev, you out of line, big dog. Let physical fighting stay physical. But once somebody grab a weapon, hey, you doing too much, big dog. Pat Bev, I think he crossed the threshold. Yes, was Chris Paul culpable of a little bit of trash talk? Absolutely. But crossing that threshold, gotta draw the line there, Slick.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I can't argue that, but it's not as if Pat Bev is getting away with it. He is getting a 1-game suspension. They are giving him some sort of penalty. So, but the look, I mean, Chris Paul.